Turning one of our top stories, the finding of this independent review into supermarket giants handed down today. It stopped short of recommending divestiture powers into supermarkets. Joining me now is Assistant Competition Minister Andrew Leigh. Thanks for your time. So this is the interim report. The headline of these fines, 10% of revenue could be a $5 billion fine for Coles. Basically ruin the company, wouldn't it? That'd have to be a pretty extreme circumstance.
Right now, Tom, the problem is that this is a voluntary code. That's the way the Liberals and the Nationals set it up in 2015. They had a review in 2018, decided to keep it voluntary. Our view is that the voluntary code just isn't working, and we need to look at a mandatory code, or at least that's the recommendation that's come down from Craig Emerson's interim report, and that's certainly a direction that the government is keenly interested in. Are
you wary, though, of a fine being too big? I mean, is that part of what you look at when you get this recommendation of 10%? You think, well, let's not, put the as much as everyone's, beating up Coles and Woolworths at the moment, if one of them didn't exist overnight, it'd be a bit of a problem.
That's certainly right. And these are the penalties that exist in the competition law at the moment. So if they're to breach other aspects of the competition law, they would stand to get a penalty which is the greater of $10 million, 10% of turnover, or 3 times the ill-gotten gains. Craig Emerson will be looking in his final report at precisely how his recommendations would interact with the existing penalties.
This part of it is about a better deal for suppliers. It seems to me if that happens, then that might mean higher prices for consumers. Supermarkets might pass some of that on.
Well, what we're really concerned about, Tom, is this phenomenon that people have been pointing to of farm gate prices going down, but shelf prices staying the same. We want to see consumers and farmers getting a fair deal. I don't think that's too much to ask. Certainly if you look at our supermarket sector, it is unusually concentrated by advanced country standards. So it's always important for us to be looking at both the monopoly power on consumers and monopsony power on suppliers.
It's very concentrated, but what does that concentration end in is the question. So Coles' net profit on its last year was just above 2.5%. That is not, from what I've seen, high by world standards. So does that mean there's not actually fat to trim, and if they pay suppliers more, they will be passing it on?
Oh, we want to ensure that people get a fair deal. That includes the farmers and the consumers. I don't think you want to characterise this as a zero-sum game, Tom. We want to work constructively with supermarkets. And what this report from Craig Emerson illustrates is that there has been a real concern about reprisals from suppliers.
But you have to be a bit careful what you're sort of saying you'll deliver to people, because I know you said it's not a zero-sum game, but either the supermarkets make less money, and I'm suggesting perhaps that they don't have a really high profit margin, or suppliers are going to get less, or consumers pay more. So do you have to be careful about what you're promising here?
Well, the reason I don't think it's a zero-sum game, Tom, is because good complaints mechanisms are something that you want to be building into the system. And with those good complaints mechanisms, with greater transparency, such as the choice price monitoring that'll be coming for, somewhere around the end of June, and with the investigation that the ACCC is doing into supermarkets around issues such as loyalty schemes, we are providing a greater level of scrutiny. The Albanese government is a pro-business, pro-worker government. So we don't believe we need to be choosing there. We're keen to ensure that there is a strong competitive environment operating in this sector.
You think you can improve results for suppliers and bring down prices through two different reviews? Do you think they're both achievable?
Absolutely.
That has to mean supermarket profits go down, wouldn't it?
No, look, we're committed to making sure that business does well. And you've seen, indeed, an increase in investment in most of the time that we've been in office. Big contrast with the Coalition's time in office, where investment was falling for much of their time in office.
Non-compete clauses you're looking at as well. So from my understanding, essentially, when you end a job somewhere, you have this period where you can't work for a competitor, whether it be 6 months or 12 months. Do they make sense at all? Could you just scrap them all together? Is that on the table?
That's what the United States Federal Trade Commission has recommended. We're not jumping to conclusions, but we're beginning a conversation with Australians about the role of non-compete clauses. A fifth of Australians have these agreements that make it harder for them to move to a better job.
That's a lot.
It's huge. Of the country. It's huge. It's not just executives, it's security guards, it's early childhood workers, it's hairdressers, being constrained often by boilerplate agreements which are impeding them from moving to better paying jobs.
Your starting point on this in a principle is, do we really need this? And if somehow it can be justified in certain industries, you might have it. But your default is, I'm not sure we need this at all. Is that fair to say?
Well, we don't have a default. We're opening a consultation and for the first time getting some data on the table.
Okay.
If we'd had this conversation a year ago, Tom, we wouldn't have any data. We've now got a survey from the employee side and the employer side, an issues paper which goes through a whole range of the detail.
All right.
Daniel Molino's House Economics Committee last week came down with an important report saying we need to scrutinise non-competes more.
Andrew Leigh, thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Tom.